Three, two, one, and we're live. Welcome. I have Simon Theakston from Silver Bullet with me today.
Thank you very much. Yeah, good to be here.
Yeah, thank you for coming on
No
this
problem.
bright and beautiful Friday morning.
Yeah.
It's a little bit chilly in this room, but I think that'll keep us motivated for the next 30 minutes or so. So, for the audience, would you mind just describing a little bit about what Silver Bullet does?
Yeah, it's actually a good question. I think if you'd asked me maybe 6 or 9 months ago, I'd have said we're a data consultancy and maybe systems integrator focusing mainly in the DMP space. I think what we've seen more recently is that's kind of expanded more into data activation. So the consultancy and the DMP side of things is still core to what we do. But a lot of the work we now do with clients is really unifying their data, bringing it together, and then making sure they get the most out of it wherever that needs to be. So typically that tends to be marketing, but more and more we're seeing other areas like on-site personalization, internal BI tools, places like that. So we're a data activation consultancy, I suppose, that actually gets stuff done as well. So our experience is such that we can carry out the recommendations that we make, I guess.
Okay, so you're mostly focused on getting data from point A to point B in the most effective way possible.
Yeah, and basically unsiloing the data, bringing it all together, and then activating that wherever it most needs to be.
Okay, and what kind of technology solutions are you working with? And so you mentioned the DMP. Is that still exclusively the focus of the business, or
not quite exclusive? As I say, maybe 6-9 months ago it was. I think we're now working more with that's kind of expanded. So we're now working on the CDP side of things as well, and data tech generally.
And do you see that as a kind of natural evolution within the buy side of the market in terms of the technology focus of advertisers and of agencies?
Yeah, I think it's where a lot of the conversations we've had have started going, really. We've got offices in 3 regions. So we're headquartered in London, have an office in Milan and one in Melbourne as well. And I think the interesting thing is the conversations between those 3 offices are sort of very different in terms of where clients are. I think in the UK here, we're seeing clients who have perhaps been using a DMP for the last couple of years or so, coming to an end of a contract cycle. And the work we do is helping them either get the most out of that investment or look at potentially other areas that they can use their data in, and answering the question of what next, what else is out there, I suppose. So
talk to me a little bit about the evolution of the business, because I think you founded the business maybe a couple of years ago. Yeah,
we've been going just over 2 years now. So I suppose the most relevant piece of my background is I was part of the Bluekai team that launched the Bluekai DMP into Europe 4 or 5 years ago. My role was what Bluekai and then Oracle called the solutions consultant role. So I was sort of the technical side of pre-sales. And I launched the business with Umberto Torrielli, who was a former Bluekai employee as well. Umberto's role was on the post-sale side. So he was initially based out in the US, setting up and implementing the platform, and then came over to Europe after the Oracle acquisition to lead the onboarding team for Bluekai across Europe. So, Bluekai really sprung out of Silver Bullet really sprung out of the idea that while the ad tech, martech, data tech landscape is, multiplying at a crazy rate, the skill set and the services required to really get the most of those platforms wasn't growing at the same speed. So that's where we come in, and we don't really have any technology ourselves, save a few tools to help us work more efficiently. We don't buy media, we don't sell media. We're just focused purely on helping clients get the most out of their investment into that sort of data tech landscape.
And do you still see that skills shortage today? Has that changed since you launched the business? I mean, clearly that's a role that you continue to play in the ecosystem, but generally speaking, do you think that skill set is still lagging behind technology and capability?
On the DMP side, yes. I think, a lot of the clients we work with, I think that skill set is limited in the industry, which is a double-edged sword for us. It's part of the reason why we've been able to grow the business, because we've been able to find the right resource and bring in some really great guys to be able to sort of manage that on behalf of our clients. But it does mean that it's very hard for, DMPs being relatively new technology. it's hard to find people with experience and proven experience working in that space.
It seems to me, from an outside perspective, looking in, if I remove myself from the situation for a moment, that we don't, as an industry, take the time to really consolidate on one strategy, one technology, one set of capabilities before we're moving into the next and new vanguard of ad technology, whether that's blockchain, whether that's cryptocurrency. There are continual innovations in what it is we're looking to go on and achieve, and that sometimes I believe stifles our ability to deliver and execute on the capability that we have today.
Yeah, I think we see that a lot. Certainly in terms of the DMP, I think the DMP in a lot of ways was touted to be the silver bullet, no pun intended, for marketing. This thing you could just put all your data into and it would just, it would answer all questions, it would perform above average, et cetera, et cetera. And I think we've seen that that's not always the case. I think during my time at Oracle anyway, I'm guessing your time at Lotami as well, we came across a lot of businesses that it was new technology. They didn't quite know how to manage it, didn't quite know how to handle it. And a lot of the work we're doing now is still teams that, brought the DMP technology in and weren't quite sure how to manage it from there. And to your point, I think we're now seeing that with the CDP side of things too. There's a lot of stuff now where CDP, there seems to be regular articles on LinkedIn every week around sort of DMP versus CDP and all that kind of stuff. And, my point of view is I think they're very different. I think they're complementary technologies. I don't think it's necessarily a versus situation. But I think it's the nature of the industry to a certain extent. Everybody's looking for the next big thing and how that can work rather than focusing, consolidating and managing on the investments that have been made already.
Yeah, and I think just to go back to the CDP versus DMP, I absolutely agree with you. I believe that they are incremental and strategic partners, essentially. I think that part of the reason that debate seemingly always comes about is because we have such a huge expansion and extrapolation in the types of ad technology and MAR technology solutions that we can work with, that there's always going to be an element of overlap. And it's the element of overlap that I think we tend to focus on, and the ability of both platforms to deliver at least some similar or like capabilities. Yeah. So how many people do you have currently employed?
So we are, on the delivery side, I think we're up to about 17 or 18 now across the three offices. So we have 8 guys in London now, actually. So it's been a really busy last 12 months.
It's expanded very quickly. Clearly, a lot of demand for these types of services.
Yeah, I think. Yeah, absolutely. I mean, as I say, I think there's a lot of organisations out there that, in the UK anyway, perhaps have invested in DMPs, potentially CDPs, and aren't seeing the ROI that they were hoping for. Equally, there are new businesses coming on board wanting to do more with their data, but not quite sure where to start. And that's kind of replicated, I guess, across our Italian office, where there's a lot of new organisations that perhaps are slightly newer to the DMP space, data activation space. So I think everybody's keen to do more with their data and make their data work as hard as possible. It's just not everybody kind of necessarily knows where to start. It's kind of a big area, and I guess that's where we can come in and help.
And where do you tend to start with an advertiser that maybe comes to you hypothetically and says, look, we need help. We've got data, or at least we think we have data. We don't really know what to do with it. We don't think that we're extracting the full value. Where do you begin that conversation?
We actually start at the end.
Okay.
So we start with their KPIs and their targets, what they're looking to try and achieve, and then work our way back from there.
Okay.
Sitting down, having conversations about, it may well be company targets, it may well be team targets, but then working back to the actual data and looking at the data that's there and ensuring that, A, the data that is being collected is supporting those goals and being collected. And if it's not, then obviously sort of making recommendations about how best to do that. But yeah, I think it has to be, we're seeing more and more, and quite rightly so, that brands and organisations want to be able to measure exactly how effective their marketing spend and how hard their data is working for them. And I think the best way of doing that is actually setting targets and understanding objectives and goals at the beginning, and ensuring that the correct data that can support those goals is being used to achieve those targets, really.
And integration and data activation, presumably identity plays a key role in that process. So what do you think about the current state of the identity landscape? It seems to be a very hot topic at the minute. Certainly, it seems to be far more a topic of conversation today than it was a year ago or 2 years ago. Where do you see the identity space at the moment?
So a lot of identity for us, I suppose, is a lot of that focuses around being able to tie users or customers to a single ID, I suppose. So we work with brands that perhaps have multiple IDs across that landscape, and our work is trying to pull that together. I think you're right, across the industry as a whole, though, that ID side of things has become much more prevalent over the last 12 months or so. You spoke to Mathieu, I think, a few weeks ago. And they're doing some great stuff in the space of, that kind of overlaps a lot with what we're doing in terms of being able to, pull users down into a single ID, which from our side of things is great, because that way we can start to, see higher overlaps in terms of the data that we're activating. But yeah, I think it's continuing to grow. I think we're seeing that more and more, especially now with, on the mobile side of things too. So being able to try and track users, across multiple devices, and I think with GDPR coming in, that's proved to be. I think that's largely where that whole kind of ID conversation has kind of crept up from. We've seen a lot of ID organisations in the mobile side of things, like Tapad, changing their offering, pulling out of the market largely because of GDPR. So that's left a lot of questions, and I suppose left some space there in terms of how we actually track those IDs across multiple platforms. Yeah,
I think just to clarify on that point specifically, pulling out of the media market, I think Tapad still maintains the identity solution within the region. So let's focus on that then for a little moment. So is that what you're seeing when you're engaging with your advertisers in terms of their focus on the metric behind identity? Are you seeing less of a focus today on, say, the cookie, and more of a focus on the mobile device ID?
I think mobile always comes up in the conversation we have. Personally, obviously it depends on clients' goals and objectives, but generally speaking, it tends to be step 2 or 3 as part of a longer journey. I think that the cookie and the unification of data to a single ID is still step 1. And perhaps in terms of activating where that data gets activated, it still tends to be programmatic display, for example, search, social, step 2 or 3, and then maybe potentially mobile after that. But then again, I think coming back to the whole CDP conversation, I think that kind of depends on what the client's looking for. I think you've got organisations like mParticle out there, which are very much sort of working with mobile focused organisations, and a lot of those companies are kind of focused on how to manage their customers, I guess, across devices, specifically on the mobile side of things. So, but typically, it still tends to be activating across sort of more traditional, I suppose, digital marketing channels.
And do you think that's going to change? I read a Gartner report, I think came out either 2017 or 2018, that indicated that advertisers, CMOs, were specifically investing more on their existing customers and technology and platforms and solutions that support communication to existing customers in favor of, I think, on a ratio of 2 to 1, versus the prospecting of new potential customers. Do you think that may be a trend that we continue to see?
Yeah, I think there's been a definite push towards companies wanting to interact directly with the customer. I think we've kind of seen that over the last couple of years, that it's not so much about acquisition, to your point of view. To your point, it's actually retaining customers and being able to have sort of like a one-to-one conversation with them based on their requirements. Taking a step back from that, I think still just data management as a whole is kind of key for CMAs. We were looking at this. We were trying to find some numbers a couple of months ago, and there was very little out there. We actually just commissioned a survey ourselves of UK CMOs, and the results came back basically saying, because of the key thing stand out for me anyway was that data management, on average, CMOs believe are costing businesses sort of nearly £1 million at the moment, just because they're not being able to pull this data together and be able to activate it and use it in a way that they can communicate with their customers and potential customers in a meaningful manner.
So it's costing them in the sense of lost opportunity.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. So I think, yes, the conversation with customers post-sale, post-acquisition is certainly growing, but I think there's a wider question there around data management and using data efficiently across the board, really, I suppose.
And what about the broader data ecosystem outside of first-party data?
Yeah, I think certainly since GDPR anyway, we've seen a big growth in second-party data sharing. Clients seem to appreciate that transparency. I think there's a slight wariness around use of third-party data, or at least more questions are being asked. And I think second-party data sharing for a lot of brands offers that transparency and that ease of being able to work with a single brand and totally understanding where that data is coming from. So I think we've seen a growth on that side of things recently. But I think the third-party data sharing, third-party marketplaces have changed dramatically as well. Oracle, later as well, have had to put in place sort of a lot of processes around being able to track permissions and where that data is coming from to be able to make it available. But for us, I think the first-party data side of things will always still be key. I think that's the first thing we look at. That's where we see typically most value, brands being able to bring in and activate their own first-party data. But yeah, second-party and third-party data sharing has proved to add value as well.
And you think that the GDPR has been a net benefit in terms of cleaning up that ecosystem?
Yeah, I think, as a result of it, we're now getting much more transparent data. We should be getting much more high quality data. I think, the data that we're seeing in the third party marketplaces like Oracle, like Lotame, tend to be of high value now because we're being able to track exactly where that's come from. Clients being able to make better decisions off the back of it.
And are you helping clients with respect to the GDPR to instantiate their own processes for obtaining individual consent and tracking that through the process?
No, we haven't got. We work with clients, sort of providing them a top line overview of GDPR, but it's not something we've worked with clients specifically on in terms of implementing, the recommendations or regulations on their side. That's still something we would recommend that they, implement internally.
For selfish reasons, because I have a panel coming up in a couple of weeks' time.
Okay.
Speaking about the intersection of creativity and data, right. I thought it could be interesting to see whether or not in the work that you're doing with your clients, how often creative strategy and content strategy comes up in the conversation in relation to data management and data activation.
It's growing. I think it should still be a larger conversation. Mm-hmm. I think there is still the first step a lot of the times is to segment users effectively and then being able to retarget them with relevant messages. But the focus is still sort of largely on the messaging side of things, that segmentation, rather than necessarily the creative side. We do work with clients who, work with dynamic creative, and obviously their data can be used to tailor that more. But yeah, I think it's a side that, it's an area that continues to grow, and I think it's something that clients can should and probably should take advantage of a bit more.
So you're seeing it bleed into some of the more tactical activation with dynamic creative optimization and storytelling through, say, activation and display, less so in the higher level creative strategy.
Yeah, I think when it comes to the actual creation of the creative itself and the messaging, perhaps the data strategy doesn't feed into that as much as it potentially could do. We have seen on the content side of things, there's definitely been a growth in terms of on-site optimization. So being able to customize content when a user comes to the site based on the data that has been collected on them. But off-site, I think it's still an area that continues to grow.
And what are some of the partners that you're working with at the moment in your engagement with clients? Who's doing it well?
So we're actually a technically agnostic consultancy. So we're partnered with most of the major data tech organizations out there. So from a marketing cloud side of things, the likes of Adobe, Oracle, Salesforce. Outside of that, the likes of Relay 42, Telium, and organizations such as that. So it kind of spans a wide spectrum, I suppose. In terms of who's doing what, it's interesting. I mean, I think certainly on the CDP side of things, there's such a wide range. The definition of a CDP is so broad that I think there's such a wide range across that technology. That there's an awful lot that does go on, can go on. The DMP side of things is a lot more sort of consolidated, I suppose. And I think it's interesting. Organisations are kind of now sort of focusing more on the technology and sort of looking for partners such as us to come in and sort of offer the services around that, which has been sort of a major change over the last 6 months.
Do you see any natural distinction between the major marketing cloud solutions and some of the more independent solutions that you mentioned, just in terms of the types of clients that they work with, the nature of the engagement? Do you see any kind of evolution in that ecosystem?
Yeah, I mean, it's just personal opinion here. I think when brands want to look for, a DMP or a CDP solution, they tend to look towards the marketing clouds first. I think that may well be just because they're already using technology from that side of things. Mm-hmm. And so being able to just activate a DMP solution off the back of that, is obviously, it can be beneficial. But I do think, more and more, certainly in the UK, we're seeing this now, that there is, as I mentioned earlier on, that sort of question around what's the ecosystem look like generally? What other players are there in the market? What are their benefits? What do they bring to the table? I think that's just sort of like an evolution of perhaps, first contract cycles with a DMP coming to an end now, and just, clients looking at how that's performed and, other potential solutions I guess.
Yeah, I guess my opinion would be, and in very general terms, that when those contracts do come up, if a certain level of service and partnership hasn't been provided by that point, particularly in the case of larger marketing cloud solutions, mm-hmm. there is seemingly a natural opportunity for smaller, more independent players that tend to focus slightly more on the partnership aspect, the delivery aspect, the people aspect of the solution to enter into the field.
Yeah, I think that strategic support post-sale is something that clients certainly look for in terms of being able to generate that ROI on their investment pretty quickly. And it's not typically something that the larger organizations tend to offer. I think you will get you'll get an account manager assigned to you, sort of thing, but it'll be very much around showing how the platform works rather than any kind of sort of strategic support. And I guess that's where we've been able to come in and support a lot of those organizations, like either on the platform side or on the direct client side, to be able to offer maybe more of a sort of strategic approach around a wider data strategy, but also how best to use that platform specifically with the client's data on a day-to-day basis.
Great. So 17 people, 3 or 4 offices across the globe.
Yeah.
What's next for Silver Bullet?
Good question. We obviously want to continue growing. I think that's going to mean, growing into more technology. So I said we're sort of seeing much more on the CDP space and the sort of the wider data ecosystem. And also geographically, I think we've got 3 offices at the moment. We've done a lot of work pretty much globally. So, we've done work in the US and LATAM, in India and in Africa. So it's a case of, building out where we do actually have feet on the ground as well.
But are there any major differences that you see from one region to the next? Anything that you could pick out?
I think maybe just in terms of maturity, perhaps of the data or knowledge of, data activation, DMP, CDP is the technology that's available. As a vast generalization, I think we're kind of seeing maybe the US being the most mature market and a few years ahead of where we are in the UK, and then equally, the likes of Italy, for example, are still maybe a couple of years behind where we are in the UK in terms of starting their data activation journey, which is great. And that APAC region is coming to terms with what they can actually do with data, and I think they're really keen and hungry to learn about the possibilities of what data can do for them. So, I think the main difference we see across markets does tend to be just sort of maturity, I suppose, and awareness of the technology and the strategy of using the platforms. And
do you think those markets, this is a somewhat leading question, but do you think those markets in Asia Pacific and across MENA, do you think that they will catch up fairly quickly? Or do you think that we're still going to be looking at this kind of staged approach where we can, in a fairly discrete manner, say, well, we're 18 months behind the US, Southern Europe and MENA are 18 months behind us, etc.?
No, I think they will. I mean, certainly from the conversations we've had there, as I said, there's a real desire to get up to speed and to really push this as far as they can. And I think that's backed up by investment that a lot of the major platforms have made over the last couple of years as well. So the likes of Salesforce and Adobe investing in in Australia and that kind of APAC region, Oracle growing their presence in Dubai. There's a real commitment from those guys as well to offer that kind of technology out there. So, and it seems to be, as I say, there's a definite desire to make the most of it. So I absolutely see them catching up.
Great. Any events, anything coming up in terms of conferences, seminars, anything like that?
Yeah, we're going to be. We've got a few things coming up and a few releases as well in terms of sort of white papers we're bringing out on the DMP and CDP side of things. A couple of events with partners as well. So we've been invited to speak at a Relay 42 event in a couple of weeks too, which would be awesome. But it's just the run up to Christmas. It's going to be fun. It's going to be busy.
Yeah, it's always a busy couple of months.
Yeah.
Well, we'll make sure to share the details of those events so that people can.
Yeah, that'd be great. Yeah, thank you very much.
Okay, perfect. Simon, thank you very much for your time.
Not at all.